My man, Brady. We had some technical difficulties on my end, so that's why if we're running a few minutes late, that is my fault. And you can tell by how flat my face looks. Usually when we come in, you can see all the horrible contours and features that make up my face. I don't think you can see them as well today because of the camera. So give me some good news. I'm flustered trying to get everything working. Give me some good news. How was your week one? Tell me you made some money. You take down a tournament. You nail all your cash games. How'd it go?
Yeah, it was a pretty good week one for me. Had a ton of Devontae Adams. He absolutely went off. I was looking extremely good. I was thinking maybe I might get a takedown into single entry. I had Joe Mixon going into the later games. He did not do as good as I thought he would, but overall was a profitable day for me, and I'm really looking forward to getting into this week too.
Yeah, so let's kick off with the chalk because it looks like we're going to have Atlanta versus Dallas. Dallas 4.5 point favorites, a 53 point total that has been on the rise. That to me, this appears to be very clearly the chalkiest game. Dak Prescott, probably the highest owned quarterback, paired with Amari Cooper, seems like the highest owned receiver. How do you approach a game that is such a smash? Like it is very clear that this Atlanta secondary is trash, got absolutely diced by a good quarterback in Russell Wilson, but that he still diced them apart. One of his better games, in my opinion. Can Dak Prescott do the same? And are you playing him at what seems to be absurd ownership?
Yeah, I like this game quite a bit. All around, I like tons of players. This is going to be one of my highest exposure games, and I think Dak's a really good play at 6,800. I think that's way too cheap for him. With the upside going against Atlanta with a 52.5 point game total, which I believe is the highest on the slate. But so I will have some Dak. I think is a fine cash play because he is going to have a nice floor against this defense. But I also like Matt Ryan at 6,600. I played him last week, and I'm going to play him again this week. He had like 450 passing yards last week. Only one touchdown, though, but in a game where the 52.5 point total was there, I think the touchdown upside is going to be there. And we know we are getting 50-plus pass attempts for Matt Ryan. And he's also stackable with guys like Ridley, Julio Jones. Hayden Hurst is someone I want to talk about. He did not have the best day last week, but I don't see that, continuing. I think he's going to bounce back against this Dallas defense, who is really bad against the tight end. So I really like that Ryan to Hurst stack there. I stacked Ridley and Matt Ryan last week. It worked out absolutely fantastic. And on the Dallas side, yeah, you can go Dak. But I really like Elliott as well in a game that's projected to score this high. I think Elliott's a fantastic play. He's able to catch the ball. He's able to score. And then Amari Cooper at 6,300 is just way too cheap. I don't really understand that. He had a good game last week. I expect the same thing here against this Atlanta defense. So lots of ownership for me in this game.
Yeah, last week we saw that the chalk game was Russell Wilson facing Atlanta, and it hits. But I think for me, the lesson to be taken away is that you don't have to bite into all of that chalk to, one, get exposure to the game. You could have done it essentially with a Chris Carson and then Calvin Ridley and gotten a lot of the fantasy points that were scored because of the concentration of touchdowns. And two, just because something's chalk and it hits doesn't necessarily make it the winning build. The winning builds were all Devontae Adams stacks with Aaron Rodgers running it back with Adam Thielen. That was the way you won, and I believe the Millie Maker winner ended up winning it with a Calvin Ridley bringback or a Calvin Ridley Greg Olsen stack, and not necessarily the whole game. And I think that's how I want to approach this game specifically. Is that I think I'm frozen. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Well, I can't tell if I'm frozen or not. I'm frozen on my screen, and I'm frozen very excited looking, which is great because I'm excited about this
Yeah,
game.
you are.
But I'm excited at playing it if I'm stacking it, I'm probably going all the way. I'm going Amari Cooper, Dak Prescott, Michael Gallup, who I think his ADOT, he had a 15 ADOT in week one. It's 1 week, but I do like to see that kind of usage. He's going deep and he's going to make splash plays. So for me, that's probably how I'd attack it. I would go all in because I think the ownership you'll get is going to be basically concentrated on simple Dak Amari Cooper, Dak Michael Gallup. I don't think people are going to appreciate that this game, if it hits 70, 3 receivers on the Cowboys could be the way to attack it. It would be if it hits like 70 total points. So for me, you either have to go all in or you get minimal exposure. You get Zeke and you hope he punches in 3 rushing touchdowns and no one else scores. So that's probably how I choose to attack it. And I think you can run it back on the other side with Calvin Ridley, who, like we saw last week, has big touchdown upside. In his 2 seasons with the Falcons, he's had a higher touchdown rate than Julio Jones in both seasons. So for me, he's the touchdown scorer on that side. Maybe Todd Gurley, although he did see his receiving work limited. It was 5 targets. 2 his backups also got 5 targets and were running routes on a consistent basis. So I think I'd probably, just because of the ownership, unfortunately, go a bit more minimal with the stacking or go all in. Next game I have on the slate here, we have Pittsburgh versus Denver. I don't want to spend too much time on this one. Pittsburgh, 7.5-point favorites, 41.5-point total. Pretty meh. It's okay. It's an okay total. It's not the worst of the slate, I don't think, but it's not great. For me, that just says maybe there's some running backs here, especially with Philip Lindsay going down. I think they say he might be able to play week 1, and the same for James Conner. I would bet neither of those guys play. That means Melvin Gordon probably gets a boosted workload, and Benny Snell, who looked slick in the running game on that Monday night game, could be the bell cow back for this team. Are you buying into Benny Snell at a very cheap price right now? I think it's fair to assume James Conner doesn't play.
Yeah, if Conner does not play, Snell is somebody I'm definitely looking at. He looked fantastic. But Melvin Gordon is interesting, especially if Lindsay doesn't play. The thing is, like, this Pittsburgh defense looks absolutely fantastic. They held Barkley to less than 10 yards. So I'm not so sure I want to, go and play that Melvin Gordon. I think he's going to be, kind of high owned if Lindsay doesn't play. So I might just stay away from that. The Pittsburgh pass catchers are pretty interesting. Juju Smith-Schuster had himself a game. Deontay Johnson at 4,500. He had 10 targets last week. But really, I'm probably just going to be looking at this Snell play if Conner is indeed out against the Denver Broncos. Not the best matchup in the world, but I think he can definitely get some volume, and I really do like that price.
Yeah, that's mostly what I've got. Let's move on to our next game. I have one that I think some people will be interested in. Minnesota versus Indy. Indy, 3-point favorites, 48.5-point total. We see this Minnesota over the past 2 years. Their secondary has just come crumbling down. Maybe that's a reason to get excited about Paris Campbell or T.Y. Hilton. But to me, Philip Rivers is gone full check down. He's checking it down to Paris Campbell, and Paris Campbell is doing work after the catch. He's checking it down to his running backs, and they can do work. His deep ball was still horrible in week 1. I just don't think he doesn't have the juice anymore. He didn't have it in week 1. He was outside the top 30 in passer rating last year on deep balls, and he didn't show anything to change my opinion so far. I look at the running backs. Jonathan Taylor, I believe, is 57 on DK. He's a guy who I think he's competing with Kenyon Drake in that range of guys you are jamming into your lineups. In my opinion, I think Taylor's the better play because of ownership. I think Kenyon Drake, playing on a better offense, has less competition for targets out of the backfield, doesn't have Nyheim Hines breathing down his back, is the better points per dollar play. I'm seeing him come close to 30% ownership on some sites, basically saying that a third of the field, over a quarter of the field at least, is going to want to play him, whereas Jonathan Taylor, popular, but not in that range. I think they're close enough in projection that my tournament mindset just says play the lower ownership guy. So Jonathan Taylor, what is your take? Is he a lock for you, or is he a guy you can still find ways to get off of? And any interest in a stack of this game? I'm lukewarm on it. I think there are probably games that have a more likelihood of really hitting a high total, but the total is up to 48.5, which is up 2.5 points. Maybe I'm selling specifically the Adam Thielen side, the Dalvin Cook side of this thing short, even if I don't like Rivers.
Yeah, I like this game actually quite a bit. Rivers is very interesting. He threw the ball 46 times last week, so the volume is going to be there, and he's really, really cheap, 5,900. He has all the weapons. He's able to check it down to his running backs. Jonathan Taylor, 5,700. This is probably where I'm going to go in cash. I'll also have in some tournaments as well. He's just way too cheap. He's going to most likely get the bulk of the carries. He's going to be able to get receptions as well. Had a couple of receptions last week. A lot of people weren't expecting him to go out there and do that, but ended up doing it. So Taylor's someone I'm really looking at. T.Y. Hilton is interesting. I really like the price. It's really intriguing at 5,700. But like you mentioned, Rivers isn't that great at throwing the ball down the field. And Paris Campbell did very well last week. 4,500 is way too cheap. So I kind of like Rivers in this spot. I think he'll be a little bit lower owned. And I think the volume's there. I think the weapons are there. And against this Minnesota defense, who looked absolutely awful against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. Aaron Rodgers had almost 400 yards, almost 3 touchdowns, something like that. Crazy game there. And I expect Rivers to, not do something like that, but still be able to have a good game there. So on the Minnesota side, I guess Cook is pretty much always in play, but I'm really liking Adam Thielen. He did fantastic last week, had himself a game. I think he had 34 fantasy points, something like that. So I might do a Rivers and Campbell stack, run it back with Thielen, maybe a Rivers Hilton stack, run it back with Thielen, something like that. That's how I'm looking for in this game. Are you there?
Looks like we lost Kyle. The audio and the visual.
Oh, boy.
So
I guess I'll take it over until he comes back.
Yeah, fire away. What's the next game you want to go over?
All right, we will talk about the Packers and the Lions here. Really, in this game, I'm just looking at Aaron Rodgers. How can we ignore the crazy game he had last week, 33.8 fantasy points? And, it's really surprised me last week because he usually doesn't go out there and use all his weapons. It's usually just Davante Adams. It's usually just, Davante Adams and Aaron Jones, but he was able to spread the ball around. So I like Adams in this spot quite a bit against this Detroit secondary. It's just another great matchup. It's really hard to ignore these two plays. So Rodgers-Adams stack is something I'm going to be looking at. Other than that, on the Detroit side, Hawkinson, he had a good game, 16.6 fantasy points last week against this Green Bay secondary. So I could see myself doing a Rodgers to Adams stack and running it back with Hawkinson, but I guess it's really interesting to maybe take a shot at some of these other receivers. Scantling is interesting at 4,600. Lazard at 5,300. I don't know if they're going to have that same volume as last week, but it's really something to think about. Maybe this year he's going to be able to use them a little bit more. So mostly Rodgers and Adams for me. You're still on mute, I think.
Yep, your audio is not coming in, but we do have your video. So keep trying. Let me look to make sure. Yeah, I have it on here. So you may want to log out and come back in, see if that works. I don't know if he hears us. But anyway, Brady, what's the next game? But the Lions is a good
All right, we'll go to the next
because the Lions have not shown that they can play defense. When they're up 17-0 and you lose to Washington, that ain't good.
Any luck?
Yeah, not at all. We're back.
Am I home?
Yeah, you're there.
Yep.
For now, this is the James Conner plays 10 snaps and ruins all my showdown lineups of shows, apparently, where I come in and drop nuggets for 4 games and then I'm out for the next 8 or whatever. I agree with a lot of the Packers talk. I think they're going to get a lot of maybe recency bias ownership based on how we saw the Aaron Rodgers FU World Tour begin for people doubting him. But I'm not sure. This isn't a good secondary. It's not a good defense. But I think that Minnesota defense could end up being one of the worst in the league. I still think this team is built to have a bit of a balanced approach with having Aaron Rodgers propelled some receivers to good games. They're not particularly talented receivers outside of obviously Davante Adams, who I think now that Michael Thomas is injured is just Michael Thomas. He is what we're going to call Michael Thomas from now on. Crazy target share. He topped, I believe, 40% air yard share and target share in his first week. Those are crazy numbers. I still think he will lead the league in target share and air yard share going forward. So he's a guy that I think you probably, if you can get the money, you have to be getting him into your cash game lineups. Outside of that, on the other side, I think TJ Hawkinson, as a crazy athlete and a guy who could be benefiting from Kenny Golladay either not playing or being injured, is a guy I'd go to. This isn't my favorite game. I think it's going to be a little over-owned relative to what we could expect. I think there's some lower owned, lower total, but could hit the over spots. I have one here that I don't think is the case. Gardner Minshew, the Jags, 9-point dogs to Tennessee and a 42-point total. Derrick Henry, 30 touch upside, relatively inexpensive, just under 8,000. Any interest in any guys outside of him? Because I think it's fair to say that he is a fringe cash game play. I think there are cheaper plays that I'll probably end up being on, but if someone told me they had Derrick Henry in cash, I wouldn't blame them.
So this game is probably the one I'm least excited about playing in my lineups, and really the only person I have highlighted here is Derrick Henry at 7,900. The rushing upside's there. The volume is there for Henry, and going against this Jacksonville's run defense, it's something I really want to target. So 7,900, I'm kind of debating between going maybe an Elliott in cash or maybe a Henry in cash, but Henry is something I'm definitely going to be looking at. But that's about it in this game. It's not the prettiest game to play.
Yeah, for me, I think I would even be going Zeke in that 1v1, just given the receiving upside, the scoring, the overall scoring profile of his team. Dallas is probably going to be scoring more points, I would imagine, despite, the Jacksonville defense is terrible. The Dallas offense is just better. So for me, Zeke is still the guy. I don't think Henry is a bad play by any means. I get why you'd consider him. I'm just going to take what I think is a better receiving projection and a similar carry projection. Maybe you give Derrick Henry the edge in carries, but targets are targets, and they're really valuable in fantasy, especially if you're playing on DraftKings, but even on FanDuel, they're still quite valuable. So for me, he's the guy, and like you said, this game is one of the worst. I'm not really interested in it. Another one that maybe people are going to draw more interested in, Chicago, 5.5 point favorites over the Giants, a Giants team that couldn't really get much going, specifically in the Saquon Barkley realm. A 42-point total. What are you doing with Saquon Barkley? He was so incredibly inefficient as a rusher. He gets it done enough through the passing game, but it was ugly on Monday Night Football. The Chicago defense, another stout defense like he faced in Pittsburgh. I would say a lesser defense, but still one of the best. What do you do with Saquon Barkley at this point?
Yeah, we have to take into consideration, the Pittsburgh defense, but that was, kind of embarrassing, like less than 10 rushing yards. I did have him in a lot of showdown lineups, so that wasn't good, but I'm probably not going back to him this week. Like you said, Chicago's a pretty solid defense themselves, and there's just the plays around him that I like a little bit more. Zeke, I like Henry a little bit more than Barkley, but I think if you want to get different, and I don't think many people are going to go out there and play Barkley because of that performance, and he still has that upside. He has the pass catching upside, he has the touchdown upside. So maybe if you want to, get kind of a lower owned play in that high tier, I think you could go Barkley. For me, really in this game, I like Robinson. Last week he did not do as good as I thought he would do. I think he had like 12 points, was not able to find the end zone. Trubisky, I had some Trubisky actually. I think he had like 24 points, was pretty solid for his price. And I might go back there this week against this Giants defense who is just not that good whatsoever. Trubisky is 5,500. I do like the Robinson sack, so I will be playing that in a couple lineups. But other than that, not too interested in that in this game here. The Giants receivers are very interesting. It's just hard to tell which one's going to do good. Slayton 5,000. Shepard 5,500. You have Golden Tate if he plays. It's just really hard to tell, which one's going to go off on any given week. So that's about it for me on this game.
Yeah, I think you could go to Robinson. Maybe forgetting. It's crazy to say I don't know if I'm still on. It's crazy to say that playing Saquon could be different, but I think it will be different, which is absurd. But I think if you can get Saquon at low ownership, you have to have a sprinkle of him. I'm not going overboard, but I will have some Saquon. You can probably run it back with Robinson. Next game I have here, Tampa Bay versus Carolina. Tampa Bay, 9.5 point favorites, a 47.5 point total. That total has come down just a bit since opening. The Bucs look bad. Like, they did not look good in their opener. What do you make of this Bucs offense? For me, let's start at the top. We have Chris Godwin now comes up with concussion. He didn't show symptoms on Monday and Tuesday, as far as I know, and then Wednesday he enters concussion protocol. It seems unlikely that he plays on Sunday. It's typically not that short of a turnaround to come out of concussion protocol when you enter it on Wednesday. I don't think we'll see him, although no guarantees. Mike Evans played. He saw 6 targets. 2 of those get nixed by penalty, so it looks like 4, but he wasn't crazy far off from Godwin's 7 when you consider the fact that 2 of those don't show up on the stat sheet. So for me, Evans is playing at a capacity enough that I can consider him. I don't think he's extremely limited by this injury. He's not 100%. But on the outside, then you get a guy like Scotty Miller, who's a bit small, but he runs like a 4.44, I believe. He's a burner, and he was a college producer as well. Any interest in this passing game against a terrible Carolina secondary?
I don't really know what to do with this Bucs offense. I was expecting them to do a lot better than they did on Sunday there, but Ronald Jones at 5,200 kind of interests me. He got the bulk of the carries. I think he had like 17 carries. And against this Carolina defense, that's something I do want to target there. Scotty Miller, like you said, if Godwin doesn't play, I'm just going to lock Scotty Miller into my cash lineup, 4,100. Tom Brady likes the slot, and I like Scotty Miller quite a bit. So at that cheap, he's going to get the volume. And I really don't know what to do with Mike Evans. He was kind of playing not 100% on Sunday, but he's priced at 6,400, which is very intriguing. And if Godwin doesn't play, I think Evans, turns into a fantastic play there. Even if Godwin does play, I think Evans at 6,400 is very viable. On the Carolina side of the ball, McCaffrey at 10,000. I don't know if I'm going to go there this week, and it's a lot because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers running defense is very good. Number 1 in the league against the run. They were able to hold Alvin Kamara pretty solidly in the running game, but Kamara had like 2 touchdowns. So I think McCaffrey can still score, and I still think he can get receptions and has that reception upside. But 10,000, I'd rather just pay down for Zeke. I'd rather pay down for Henry, other guys like that, Edwards, Solaire. So I'm probably not going McCaffrey this week. And other than that, Robbie Anderson had himself a game, 28.5 points. 5,200. DJ Moore, 6,300. I think is a little too cheap, but this game's tough because I do want to have ownership to it. I just don't know where my ownership's going to go yet. I still want to hear, more about if Godwin's going to play. I want to hear more about if Evans is going to be like 100% or close to it. So I'm just going to be waiting for the news throughout the week.
Yeah, on the Tampa side, I would imagine we see my lean is no Godwin and Mike Evans, number one receiver, as much as he is physically capable of it. But because of that, I think we're going to see almost a 1B Scotty Miller. So he's a guy that, I'm jamming him in if we get this news. Other than that, on the other side of the ball, Carolina, Robbie Anderson getting a lot of hype after going over 100 and a touchdown after being trapped on a terrible Jets team for years. We still saw DJ Moore lead the team in targets, lead the team in air yards. We know he is a stud. We saw what he did last year in the face of terrible quarterback play on a terrible offense. He's the guy I'm going to be going back to. I get that Robbie Anderson had a good game. I don't think it's sustainable based on the opportunity. At least, that level of production is certainly not sustainable. I don't think it's even sustainable that he leads this team in receiving production. DJ Moore is getting the volume. I'm going to chase that volume and go with DJ Moore. And like you said, this is tough Tampa run defense. Christian McCaffrey is so expensive at 10K. Last week, he had a good game. He did not appear very often in the top 0.1% of lineups. You don't need to, unless Christian McCaffrey goes for 45, you simply don't need him in your lineups. If he goes for 30, he doesn't end up being that great of a play. At 10K, that is just not the Josh Jacobs incredible. Like when a guy like Josh Jacobs can outscore him, when guys like Dalvin Cook, Zeke, Jonathan Taylor, Kenyon Drake can all put up 70, 80% of his production on a given week at the cost of, 60, 50%, you go with those guys and you won't hit on them all the time. I like Jonathan Taylor this week. I don't know if he's going to hit, but I know if he does hit, he gives me such a massive edge over the people who get a similar score, maybe 5 more points out of CMC. So for me, I'm rarely in on CMC just because of his price right now. Let's hop into another game. Miami versus the Buffalo Bills. Miami's 6-point dogs, a 41-point total. Josh Allen, shredded the bad Jets defense last week. He could do the same this week against another bad Miami defense. I'm just not sure how I want to stack this team. We saw Devin Singletary's out of all of my lineups now. I have hardly any interest in him because we saw Zach Moss getting the red zone work. The receivers, John Brown comes up Wednesday with a foot injury, didn't practice. Is it all the Stephon Diggs show, and does that matter with such an inaccurate passer?
So if Brown does not play this week, I think Diggs will be a fantastic play. But I do like Josh Allen at 6,700. He's going to have that rushing yard upside. He's actually, I think, he's a really good quarterback himself as well. 33 points last week against a poor defense, but he's playing another poor defense in Miami this week. So I'm probably going to play some Josh Allen. And it's tough. If Brown and Diggs both play, it's like, who do you stack them with? Brown 6,000, Diggs is 6,500. You really can't tell who's going to go off. But if Brown doesn't play, it makes it a lot simpler. So I'll be looking for that news there. Allen, Diggs stack, without Brown playing, I would be really interested in. Other than that, not too much interest in from the Miami side of the ball. Don't really want to touch anything there. Don't want to touch the Bills running backs, especially with Zach Moss getting those red zone carries there. The Bills defense, if we're going to talk some defenses, I think they're fine at 3,900 against Miami. I think they'll do good. It's a little bit pricey though. But other than that, just got to look out for that John Brown news. If Brown's out, I will definitely have a decent amount of Diggs.
So we've talked about a handful of not good games. I might have actually found the worst one. Jets, 7-point dogs to San Francisco, 42.5-point total. We see George Kittle shows up. It was either no or limit. I think it was no practice. Him and Brandon Ayuk both no practice on Wednesday or earlier today. Maybe it's Raheem Mostert. They run him out and run the ball every single play because their receivers and tight ends are all dead. Maybe that's where you go. Outside of that, no Le'Veon Bell on the other side. Jamison Crowder needed one long catch towards I think it was in the second half where he broke a tackle to make it happen. Jets offense is terrible. San Francisco against a bad Arizona defense didn't look much better. I think both these teams are trending in the wrong direction, and I'm just not buying into it.
Yeah, you're probably right. This is probably the game you do not want to target on DraftKings. If anything, maybe some Mostert at 6,400. Don't know how much they're really going to pass the ball, especially if Kittle does not play. So I guess that's one way to look at it. Chris Herndon at 3,400, really cheap tight end. I think he had like 6 to 8, something like that, targets last week. I think he's a decent option if you do want to punt down at tight end. But other than that, not too interested in this game. I think Bell's on the IR now. I don't think he's playing for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
So maybe Josh Adams is someone to look at 4,400. That's extremely cheap, but this is not a game that I'm not all that interested in playing.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not playing any Frank Gore. I think they said he'll be the starter. I don't think if LaMichael Pirines healthy, he'll end up taking away targets. And Sam Darnold, I don't even know if he can target a running back anymore. He looked done. This Adam Gase offense just ain't doing it for me. Let's move to the next game I have. Los Angeles Rams versus Philly, another team that looked scuffed week 1. Philly. Carson Wentz gets sacked 8 times. I believe that was a career high for him by a very stacked front Washington team, but you still can't be letting that happen. Their line is so banged up. Miles Sanders is expected to play week 1, but what is he rushing behind, and what can his quarterback do? Philly's a team I'm not super interested in. The Rams, they come out and kind of surprised Dallas with the win in week 1. Don't put up a ton of points in doing it, but Dallas didn't really force them to. I've always been interested in the Rams because they're a team that when they're losing, they pass at such an incredibly high rate. I believe when they're at a deficit at all last year, they passed at a higher rate than any other team. And when they were losing by 7 or more points, they ran faster than any other team, like 20 seconds per play over a second faster than any other team. So they run fast, they throw a lot when they lose, and when they win, it's usually because Goff plays particularly well. So for me, they have a very sort of positive range of outcomes where if they're bad, they're good fantasy bad, or when they're good. So I like this team a lot, but I'm not sure what to make of the Philly side. We see Zach Ertz maybe getting pushed to a real target squeeze in the sense of he's not going to be the Zach Ertz by Dallas Goedert going over 100, scoring a touchdown. What do you make of the tight end situation? Do you like any part of this game? It's a game with a decent total, 47. Are you buying into maybe a Philly bounce back?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to bounce back after that performance against the Washington football team. I was really not expecting that whatsoever. I guess what I'm looking at here is, of course, you can play Goddard. You can play Ertz. They're always in play. It's just a tricky situation because both guys are more than capable of doing well on any given week. Miles Sanders, I believe he's going to play this week at 6,000. I was all over him last week, and he ended up not playing. Don't know if I'm going to go back to him here because that Philly offensive line, kind of beat up. Did not show me any, much great things on Sunday. So I'm kind of, wary about that. And plus, maybe he's going to be a little bit more owned than he should be. But that price is intriguing for Miles Sanders. Malcolm Brown at 5,700 for the Rams is pretty intriguing to me. 26 fantasy points. It looks like he's going to be the guy for now. 5,700 is not a bad price for that. Other than that, on the Rams side, I really don't know what to do. I'm probably not going to play much of this game here. I mean, you have Robert Woods, you have Cooper Kupp. I think they're in play, but just not overly interested in it. As a defense, maybe the Rams, because the Eagles are very beat up on the offensive side. Maybe the Rams are able to have a good day at 2,800, but other than that, I'm not too interested in this game as a whole. Probably as much as I should be. With the 47-point total, that is a little bit intriguing, but I don't know. This is a tough game to call.
Yeah, let's hop into one that I think is going to be, it has the same total at 47, but is going to have a lot more popular pieces. It is the Cardinals versus the Washington football team. Cardinals 7-point favorites. Kyler Murray last week has the 100-yard DK bonus. They kneel out of the shotgun twice, and he loses like 9 yards on 2 kneels and costs me a lot of money. I don't know if he thought about that when he decided to kneel out of shotgun 4 yards deep, but he did it. It does illuminate his upside, though. He has Lamar Jackson type of 300, 100 upside. I'm not sure if Washington is the team to score points at will to force Kyler Murray to throw a ton. They could just get up by a touchdown early and pound Kenyon Drake, who has a criminally low price of $5,900. I talked about Jonathan Taylor being a pivot. That's because Kenyon Drake is so high owned for good reason. It is a strategy play. It is not an indictment of Kenyon Drake, who got the bulk of the carries, got a handful of targets. My only reason for maybe like it being anything other than a strategy play is that Chase Edmonds, 5 targets to Kenyon Drake's 2, also gets a red zone target, which I believe is the one he scores on. That's worth noting, but Kenyon Drake still ran more routes than him, played on more of the receiving snaps. Kenyon Drake at 5,900, one of the weaker prices on DraftKings' behalf this slate. DeAndre Hopkins, Kyler Murray both have a ton of upside. Where are you going on this Cardinals side? But more importantly, how do you run it back? Are you stacking this and do you run it back? Because the Washington side is just meh.
Yeah, I actually like this Cardinals side quite a bit. Kyler Murray is probably where I'm going to go to in cash. 6,100. He's going to have that rushing yard upside, that rushing yard floor, and he's a beast. And going against his Washington football team defense, who did look great last week, but I think that was a lot of because of the Eagles kind of being beat up on the offensive end, missing a lot of players. I think Murray's going to have a lot of success through the air, especially with some decent targets like DeAndre Hopkins. Shout out to you, by the way. You called that DeAndre Hopkins. He was way too cheap last week, and he absolutely went off. I think he had like 32 points. So I do like that Murray and Hopkins stack. As for running it back, it is pretty tough to do that, but I think there are some options. McLaurin at 5,900 did not have the best game last week. I think he had like 11 fantasy points last week. I think he's a fine option here against this Arizona defense. And then Thomas, the tight end, at 3,600, way too cheap. Had a decent amount of targets last week. I think he scored like 13.7 points. So that's someone else I'm looking at if I do want to, stack and bring it back with a couple options there. And then, of course, we got to talk about him. Kenyon Drake, 5,900, absolutely way too cheap in this offense. I know the Washington football team does have a very good defensive line, but he can do it in the passing game as well. I think he'll have a fine game. I think he'll be able to find the end zone as well. So a game I really have some interest in, especially from the Murray side. I'm locking him in cash. He's just way too cheap, and I like the Murray Hopkins stack in tournaments.
Yeah, I have 2 points. Logan Thomas led his team in air yards and targets last week. He's a guy who I think is just still. I think he could be this year's like Darren Waller, where we just never adjust to how much of a target hog he is on a team that has Terry McLaurin, who's really good. Steven Sims is okay as a slot receiver or whatever, and that is it, absolutely it. So for me, he's a guy that I think I'm going to try and get in on this low price at. One other note, maybe in tournaments, I could see myself going some Washington defense. I think you don't want to generally be playing against Kyler Murray, but he did lead the league in sacks last year, sacks taken last year. And we saw the Washington defense come out and sack Carson Wentz 8 times with 4 first-round picks on their defensive line. Probably just a play on them being cheap and having a lot of sack upside. Maybe they get a fumble or force a pressure that turns into a pick 6. I don't think it's probably in the play for cash. I don't know, maybe consider defense. I'm just trying to save money at defense, even in cash and tournaments, whatever. So I think maybe they're an interesting leverage play. Outside of that, Logan Thomas, and I'll probably move on. Kansas City, Los Angeles. Chargers, 8.5-point dogs. Poor Los Angeles. 50-point total. The total dropped to 47.5, which is interesting, but it's still quite high for the slate, or at least reasonably high. And most of that, I think is probably on the Chargers just not being an exciting team based on how they played Cincy. Based on how they played Cincy. Quite a boring game. Comes down to a last-second field goal. I think Randy Bullock botched. Whatever. The big concern here is that Tyrod Taylor targets Austin Eckler just once. I am going to not write that off, but I'm going to say that is somewhat of an anomaly. Austin Eckler, targets are a talent statistic. That is what they are. I'd say running backs can be scheme targets a little more easily than a receiver can, playing on the boundaries against good corners, but they are still a matter of, LeGarrette Blount is not a good receiver. He doesn't get targets. Austin Eckler is a good receiver. He does get targets. He'll get less with Tyrod Taylor, but this team is supposed to get absolutely buried by the Chiefs. One of the biggest spreads of the week at 8.5. That means more dropbacks for Tyrod Taylor. Some of those will convert to targets to Austin Eckler. I think he's a guy you can buy low on the Chiefs side. Is Clyde Edwards-Helaire just such a terrible price, and why is nobody all over it? I think he should be one of the chalkiest running backs of the slate. The ownership I've seen for him is very modest. Are you in on Clyde Edwards-Helaire like I am?
Yeah, I am actually. And I noticed that as well. Not many people are talking about Edwards-Helaire and 7,400 in a game that's projected to score decently high. I'm really high on this guy. He's able to score the ball, and we all know about the Chiefs running backs. They typically do very good no matter who's there, and he's very talented as well. I guess the only concern I had was the goal line work for Helaire. He had like 8 opportunities to get into the end zone, and he was not able to get like any of them. I guess that was a concern, but hopefully he's able to get into there this week because I do like him quite a bit. Of course, you can always go Mahomes. I guess the concern would be they are like 8.5-point favorites. Maybe they get up too high and they start running the ball a little bit more. Other than that, on the Chargers side, like you mentioned, Eckler, only 1 target, which is very concerning. I thought he was going to have a lot more than that, but this is a game where they're most likely going to be trailing, so the targets have to come, right? So I guess Eckler, I think he's going to be a lot lower owned because people are going to see that only 1 target, maybe think, it's what it's going to be like for the rest of the season. I don't think so as well. So Eckler could be kind of a spot where he's decently low owned there. Keenan Allen, 5,900, I think is way too cheap for a guy in the caliber of himself. against this Kansas City team where they are going to be trailing, where they are going to be throwing the ball, most likely quite a bit. So, yeah, Allen's somebody I'm looking at. And then Sammy Watkins really surprised me. I don't know if it was like a one-game thing or anything, but he had 9 targets, and he was looking really good. 7 receptions, 82 yards, and a touchdown. I don't know if that was just like a week 1 thing. I'm assuming it's going to be, the Hill show and the Kelsey show most weeks, but Sammy Watkins really surprised me.
Yeah, Sammy Watkins, I believe, led his team in targets and air yards. And it's not like that's going to happen sometimes. Not often, but sometimes, because he's clearly the number 2 receiver on this team. Outsnapped McCole Hardman and Demarcus Robinson. He ended last year playing, I believe, over 80% of the team snaps in all of their playoff games. They view him as their number 2. Whether that's the smartest thing for them to do with McCole Hardman or not, I don't know. But that's how they view him, as their second receiver with McCole Hardman playing a gadget player role. So until they show us that that's not how they're going to treat them, Sammy Watkins will be in play as Patrick Mahomes' second receiver every week. Let's move on to our last game of the main slate, Houston versus Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. 7-point dogs, 7-point dogs, Houston are a 52-point total. Lots of points in this game. Salary's a bit high on the Ravens side, especially when you look at a guy like Lamar Jackson, priced all the way up there as the number 1 QB, over 8,000, I believe. What do you do with a guy like Jackson, who is so expensive, but has, I'll say, like that Christian McCaffrey upside? You're paying for upside. I'm not sure if you're exactly getting it when you can save so much money. And then are you stacking him? Are you running him back? And why is Will Fuller one of the best receiver plays on this week?
Yeah, Lamar Jackson is someone who's always going to be in play, and like on a game with this big of a total, it's something I'm really interested in. And I did play Lamar Jackson last week. I stacked him with Andrews, and Jackson had like 30 points in like the first, until like the third quarter, and then they started running the ball a little bit more because they were up so much on the Browns. So Jackson's someone I'm looking at. You can stack him with Brown. He's 6,200. You can stack him with Andrews. He is 6,300. I really like that stack quite a bit. On the Houston side, I don't really know what to do. I mean, the Ravens defense looked absolutely fantastic, but I think that was more because of the Browns just really couldn't get it going. So Will Fuller at 6,300 I like. David Johnson looked really good last week. He's 5,800. I think that's way too cheap, for how much they're going to use him. But in this game, Lamar Jackson, I'm probably not going to go there in cash because I do like Murray, who's like 2,000 cheaper, but I do think Lamar Jackson is a good tournament play. Maybe with a Mark Andrews stack, maybe run it back with Will Fuller. I like that quite a bit.
Yeah, for me, Will Fuller, I just don't get another guy. We talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's got the role. He's on the right team. Why isn't his ownership through the freaking roof? I feel that way with Will Fuller. Will Fuller, I believe, is 6,300. Last week, 32% of his team's targets, stunning 45.6% of his team's air yards. He is both getting all of the targets and all of those targets come deep, or at least a lot of them. Those targets coming from Deshaun Watson, an incredibly effective thrower at all levels of the field. I don't get why people aren't. Is it just the defense? And I get it. It's a great defense. But like you said, I think we are overreacting to how good that defense was based on Baker Mayfield looking like absolute garbage. I love Baker. I will openly admit it was such an incredibly bad game from Baker. Oh my God. This defense is good, but I don't know if they're completely shutting down Deshaun Watson good. And if they're not shutting down Deshaun Watson, he is so intrinsically tied to Will Fuller that I think you can even stack Watson and Fuller, run it back with a guy like Marquise Brown. Seems like it'll be low owned for a guy like Watson who has so much upside, and Fuller as his team's true like alpha number 1 receiver. I don't see how he's not one of the chalkiest plays that is slate at this price. If it's just defense, I'm willing to fade 1 week of a bad defensive matchup against a good defense. I'm fading that for 1 week given the volume.
Yeah, I agree. Will Fuller is someone who I'm definitely going to be looking at. Just way too cheap. I mean, the number 1 receiver on Houston. And I think they're going to be, coming from behind a lot of the game. I think they're going to be passing the ball a little bit more. Maybe some garbage time upside for Fuller. And he has that big play upside, something you really want in tournaments. So Fuller is definitely somewhere I'm going to be going in tournaments.
All right, give me your favorite stack of the week. I'll drop mine, and then we can drop out of here.
Favorite stack of the week. Let's see. Let me see. Man, I want to say Rodgers and Adams. Bring it back. I think they're going to do it again against this defense.
I'm going to go off the board by a lot, I guess. Go Tyrod Taylor, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, run it back with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think this is one of the most underrated games of the week. I don't love Tyrod Taylor, but I do think playing against the Chiefs gives any opposing offense enough upside to just attempt 50 passes, or 50 dropbacks for Tyrod could be 40 and 10 carries. So for me, that's where I'm going to have over the field. I don't think it's going to take very much at all to be over the field on those guys, which is why I like it so much, and it has a ton of upside. Guys, I think that's going to do it. I think that is everything. Emil, let me know if we have any questions or anything. You can drop in, and we'll try and answer those before I cut out, unfortunately, again. So if there's nothing, you can drop in. If not, I think that's going to do it.
Yeah, there were a few earlier that I already answered that you talked about, so we're set.
We are set. Hopefully my camera works next week and I don't have to cut in and out. But between all the cuts, I hope we dropped a ton of nuggets. I hope we help you guys win your cash games, your GPPs. You can find us on Twitter. Hit us up there and ask us any questions that you missed or didn't get to ask here. You can find us at Kyle Tweets here for me and at DFS_numbers for Brady. We will catch you guys next week on the Wednesday show.
And don't forget, we have ownership on the website, so take a look. It's fresh already this week.